Alright, now that we've got the old chassis totally naked, we're going to go ahead and start busting up some of this rust that's on it. It's not that much, really. You know, it looked worse than it really is. So I'm just taking some pretty heavy grit emery paper. We're going to help the old naval jelly out a bit. Once we get it, you know, all the good heavy surface rust off, we'll start soaking it with naval jelly. I think it's going to look pretty good. Alright, we're getting on down there. We're starting to get rid of that heavy stuff. And of course, you know, a lot of the plating is peeling on this thing, so we're going to have to deal with that. Anyway, a little more sanding. Try to stay in the dark areas where the rust is. Don't be going over here into areas, digging too deep with this sandpaper into the plated area where it looks still pretty good. Alright, that's it. All the heavy rust has been removed, even underneath. It's a little bit of a chore, you know, you got to kind of take your time. When you get all done, your hands are just covered with stuff, but that's okay. That's all part of the hobby, you know. Alright, I even sanded the outside of these tube shield holders and a little bit around this IF can clamp. So we'll see what happens. Now comes the naval jelly. Well, it's a new day, a new morning, and I've got a lot of work to do around the house today, so I might as well get started. I'm putting some of this naval jelly on here, let it work while I'm working. And here's all I do. I just take, if I have a big old jar, just sticker, just pour it on there like that. Normally I use a Q-tip, but since this is a big job, bigger than usual, I just take an old toothbrush and spread it around. You can spread it around with anything, it doesn't matter. Whatever you feel like using, use your finger. Just make sure you put a glove on. Alright, that's all I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this entire chassis wherever there's rust. I might even put a thin coat around the rest of it too to help kind of clean the gook and crap off that built up over the years. But primarily it's rust removal. Where the heavier rust was, I lay it on pretty thick. Pretty thick. Just spread it out there and just kind of blob it on. And the idea now is to let it work. Let it work. And keep it wet. You got to keep it wet. You can't let this stuff dry up. Once it dries up, it's no longer eating away the rust. So kind of cover each of those up. I'll be coming back from time to time, re-wetting where necessary. The rest of the chassis can just go with a you know, a nice layer to kind of take away any surface rust. And inside here, get these nice and coated real good. And that's about it. You know, some people say, well, how long do you leave the naval jelly on? You can leave it on 10, 12, 14, 18, 20 hours. It doesn't matter. As long as you keep it wet. And as long as it's wet, it's working. A lot of people say, oh, I don't think that's taking any more rust off. Yes, it is. As long as it's wet, it's eating away until all the rust is gone. Now, I have some rust removal to do on the inside of the chassis. So once the top is done, we'll move to the inside. Well, I'm coming out here to wet it down a little bit. It was starting to dry out, especially in this heavily rusted areas. I'm going to get it wet again. Keep it wet. Keep it wet. The longer you keep it wet, the better it works. Now, some of this stuff will fall through the holes on the chassis. Just pick it up. No problem. Pick it up with your brush. It doesn't matter if it has a little dirt in it. It's acid. It's a phosphoric acid. Very, very mild. A little bit of dirt doesn't hurt it a bit. Okay? Don't waste any. Well, I just got back from dinner downtown, so I think what I'll do is give a little bit of rub down on these rusty areas. It's had this thing soaking now. It's been soaking for about 9 hours today. I kept it wet in between honeydews. I had to come over, you know, slap a little bit more here and there and everywhere. Just kept it wet. Now I think what I'll do is give it a good wash down. See, maybe, you know, we might need a second treatment right here in this area. This was pretty badly rusted right here. It's going to be pretty pitted in there, even when we're done. Alright, it's looking real good. We got a lot of rust off that thing. And but you can see that the plating here is all peeling away. Look at there. It's all peeling away. Look at that. So we're going to have to deal with that too. But no problem. We can deal with anything. Anything we can do, anything. Now these dark areas right here, you see here's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's more rust, deeper rust that will have to be dealt with. But before I do, you can kind of take a knife blade, kind of scrape just a little bit on the top, kind of lightly, before you sand it. And that'll help with the sanding. Some of this stuff will just flake right off because the naval jelly got down underneath it. Just needs a little more help, that's all. We'll keep working on it. Right now I'm heating the chassis and burning off that old plating. Just kind of got to heat it up with the Bernzomatic. You don't have to put a ton of heat to it, but enough to where the plating will, bubble up. And once it does, you can take a little wire brush. I have a little wire brush I use, like so. Just scrape it off there with the wire brush. That's all it takes. And it takes a while to get this done since this is a larger chassis. If this were a small item, it would be no problem at all. But I'll keep working on it until I get it all down. Once I get it all down, then I'll give it another good sanding to see what parts I might have missed. Then I'll come back and get those. Well, that's the end of the first round. And we'll hit it again. Second round. It'll probably actually even take a third round. But every chassis I've ever tried to remove the plating on had an area that wanted to be stubborn about it. And you can see right here, this area right here, that plating does not want to come off. Never fails. Always something like that. Well, in a case like that, you sand it down with medium grit paper until you get it almost down to the chassis and then hit it again and it usually comes off. But there's always an area that requires more work. All the old chrome has been removed. It was quite a chore. I had to take a lot of time sanding and grinding. There was a lot of digs and scratches on this thing for some reason, but they weren't caused by me. I don't have sandpaper quite that coarse. But along the edge you can see right here where they bent it with the machines and everything. There's vertical scratches. But I sanded out most of it, and I think she's going to be okay. I'm going to do a little bit of a modification on these tube shield bases. They've got some really sharp points. These two and these two, these two and these two. I'll tell you what, you could slice a finger open on that in a heartbeat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of round them off a little bit, grind them down. Now we'll go ahead and give it a few licks with the sandpaper, just to kind of take off the rough edges. Kind of touch it up on, where it was. You see it? Oh yeah, that's nice and smooth now. No more stabbing or cutting with that thing. I decided to take a shot in the dark and hand off this chassis to my buddy Wade for some nickel and chrome plating. And when he saw it, he said, John, he says, this thing is going to show up millions of micro pitting even after I chrome it. He said, it's just eating up here and a million other places you can't even see on this camera. I said, yeah, I know, Wade, I know, but it is what it is. I'll just learn to live with it. He ran it through his acid bath, and then he went ahead and plated it. I think he gave it 3 coats of nickel, 1 coat of chrome. And just like he said, the pitting is everywhere. But, it's free of rust, and it looks a whole lot better than it did. These tube shield mounts didn't chrome as well as I expected. But it doesn't matter because they're covered by the tube shield anyway. The bracket that holds the filter can in, it's okay. Didn't do too bad. And the front's kind of okay. But, wasn't what I had hoped for. However, it is, like I said, it is what it is, and it's just covered with micro pitting from one end to the other. A few deep scratches here and there. I don't know where that stuff came from. Don't really care. So that's what we've got to work with. I think once we start getting things put back on the chassis, it'll cover a lot of this stuff up. I hope.